Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Guillermo Amaral joins me. We're going to be talking about one of those single-page application JavaScript frameworks called Aurelia. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Guillermo Amaral. Episode 395, recorded July 5th, 2016. Aurelia. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects just getting close to being officially released, like today's project, and all sorts of projects that have been around for a while and probably powering a lot of the really wonderful things that you have enjoyed over the years on the internet. Joining me today is my wonderful and talented co-host, Guillermo Amaral. Guillermo, welcome back.
How's it going, Randall?
Doing well, yeah. So I'm actually in Mexico right now, and Guillermo lives here, and so we went out and had a really nice steak dinner last night, and that was pretty good, wasn't it?
Yeah, I really liked it. I haven't been to that place at all before, so I was surprised that that place really has really tender steaks.
Yes, it was an awesome steak. Yes, I tell you, a medium rare was just perfect for that meat. Might have gone rare even, but I think medium rare is kind of a good compromise for that. Well, this is not This Week in Steaks. This is about FLOSS, about open source software. But just wanted to, again, say it's a south of the border show. We're both in Mexico at this point, so that'll be cool. So this week, we're bringing on, find the name here, Rob Eisenberg, who's going to be talking to us about Aurelia, something close to that, which is a JavaScript framework, JavaScript libraries, I'll have to get the distinction from him, that basically allows for really productive single-page apps. Now, there's a lot of frameworks in this space. The one I'm most familiar with is Angular, now being updated to Angular 2, because I'm also trying to learn its Dart companion to be able to do these sort of single-page applications. Now, what's different about single-page app is in the traditional apps I've been writing for decades, you press a submit button or fill in a form or something, and the entire form content is sent to the server, and then the server constructs an entirely brand new page with all new HTML in it. Recently, they've been moving a little bit more and more towards Ajax-based applications, where instead of refreshing the entire page, there'll be some sort of form submission or something like that. And then an Ajax call, which stands for letters that I can't remember, but it's nothing to do with what it sounds. Oh, XML is one of the letters. X is XML, but nobody ever does XML anymore. It's all JSON. And then that provides data to refresh part of the page. Well, at the real extreme end of this is like when you're reading Google Mail, where it doesn't refresh the page over and over again. It simply changes various parts of it. Different things show up, different things pop away, a few things pop over. But it's really, once you get that original frame around the outside, it seems to just stay there for the entire time you're in Google Mail. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Guillermo, what do you know about these kinds of frameworks?
Well, I think you pretty much covered most of the topics on the show today. So I think we're over. We're done.
We're done. Yes, we don't need the guests. We just did the whole show.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I've used these frameworks before, including Angular, the one you mentioned. But I'm really interested in seeing what the difference between this one and all the because there's like a crazy amount of them right now, right? And all of them with like really wacky names. I think there's like a hammerhead one and maybe like a swordfish one, and not strictly marine animal type names on those things. And there's a meteor one too. Yeah, so I really want to know what the difference between this one and all the other ones is really. But yeah, mostly what they do right now is just switch out the content on screen instead of redisplaying everything, which is really good for bandwidth, at least in mobile. So. Yeah, I hope we get a clear, idea of what this project does.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we will, because that's why we have our guest on. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And so, fill me in. What am I still missing about why someone would reach for something like this instead of the traditional sort of refresh the whole page kind of technology?
Sure. Well, Aurelia it's about building native-like experiences. So forget kind of the traditional web and think of the browser more as a virtual machine. And when you're targeting the browser with Aurelia, you're really building something that's akin to a desktop application, a richer native-like experience. Of course, with Aurelia, you can also target the phone. So you're building native-like mobile apps. And we can literally also deploy directly to the desktop as well across platforms. So it's all about building a richer user experience, one that meets or exceeds the expectations that an end user has for a native phone app or a native desktop app or these sorts of scenarios. So there's a lot more about usability, user experience. The state is kept in the browser the same way that if you had a desktop app, you know, it would obviously keep certain state in memory, and it would deal with caching and all these sorts of things. So it's really about turning the browser or really anywhere that open web technology can run into this rich native-like app development platform.
Now, I've been claiming, hopefully correctly, that you were on the Angular team, and then you decided to sort of go off on your own and to make Aurelia. What was the motivation for that?
You know, I have to be careful about how I talk about this because there were a lot of reasons. Just a bit about myself. I've always, not always, but for over 10 years now, I've been really interested in user experience and front-end architecture and frameworks and tools that enable building the user interface itself. And so I've done that on a bunch of different platforms, and I've always done that through open source. And I actually had a project called Durandal.js, which is very popular, still in wide use. That's a JavaScript framework for building single-page apps. And I was prepping for a kind of a next-generation version of it. And that's when the Angular team saw me and said, oh, hey, this looks a lot like what we want to do with our 2.0 direction. Would you come join us? And I said, yeah, I said yes. And in the beginning of that project, it looked very much like that was an accurate statement to say that they were going in the same direction that I was. But after a number of months passed, it became very, very clear that they had a lot of different internal motivations. They had a different set of experience, a different set of things internally that were guiding and controlling that project. Which were at odds with my experience as a UI architect over the last 10 years, all the current customers I had of my previous open source, you know, everything that I've been doing in this space for about a decade. And so I said, you know what, I don't think that we can keep working together. I need to go build the thing that I know that is what is needed. And so I left, and I basically returned to what I had been doing prior to working with them. I picked up right where I left off with what was at that point, it was an end-to-end prototype of this next generation framework. And I kind of rebranded it, renamed it, and really brought it to a production kind of quality point, or at least almost production quality alpha, really, at the time. This was last year, in February of last year. And we built up a team around it. We built a company around it, and we've gone through several versions, and it's doing amazing actually now. So, and people understand that. I think that have kind of looked at what has happened with Angular from Angular 1 to Angular 2, and then looked at what we're doing. And for a lot of developers, they see, okay, I understand. This makes sense. So I could get into a lot more details. I just want to be careful because everybody asks me this question. Yeah. And there are some things that I can go into more detail on, but there are other things that it wouldn't really be appropriate at this point in time to even really discuss for legal reasons and other things.
Yeah, I understand. That's fine. Okay, let's stay with the technology then. Let's take a look at what something like Aurelia actually is doing for you. One of the things that stands out immediately is that I'm creating custom components. I'm actually creating, tags that have my own names in them. How is that even possible?
Well, believe it or not, it's been possible in the browser for a long, long time. It's just not something that a lot of people knew how to do or take advantage of. And it comes from the fact that HTML, kind of by default, if it doesn't recognize a tag as a built-in tag, it makes it into what's called HTML unknown element. And you can actually build a framework that leverages this. And what we do is we do this on two levels. One, we we deal with the older browsers that treat things that way. We also have compatibility with something called web components, which is a new official specification for custom elements that's being implemented in the browsers now. So we kind of deal with it on both fronts. But what we do is we give you a nice, clean component model around building these custom elements, so that your JavaScript code can remain very pure and very clean, mostly your own code where you don't see the framework a lot. So basically, implementing a custom element is just a matter of writing a JavaScript class, giving it properties and methods, and that's it. And a lot of these elements have render in a particular way. So you write a view with plain HTML, and the framework takes care of kind of understanding that these pieces go together. It puts them together. It binds them so that data flows correctly, and it hooks everything in the browser and just kind of makes it work. So you as a developer have this very easy process that you go about in terms of how you build the app. And everything you build in Aurelia is pretty much the same way. You write a plain JavaScript class, and you write an HTML view, and you compose and decompose your app out of these pieces. So if you have a very complicated app, maybe you have sort of the shell of the application, and maybe that's got menu, and it's got a sidebar, and maybe it's got a status bar. Well, each of those becomes a component, and then maybe inside of that sidebar, there's other components, and you kind of break things down into very small, simple pieces, and the framework gives you a pattern or process by which you can do that, and all the capabilities to kind of create those components very simply. And we're very standards compliant, and we're very much about testability. So we kind of point developers down the path of success so that they're staying close to web standards, that their code is testable, that it's clean, that it's maintainable, that it's extensible, all these positive characteristics that you would like to have of your code base. Many of them go by the way in real world projects because you just don't have, frankly, my experience working with a lot of companies don't have time to kind of do things the right way. So what we try and do with the framework is allow you to be productive, but also do things the right way so that your code very naturally gets constructed in a way that that prepares you for upcoming standards, and that is modern, that makes it extensible, that makes it testable, all these sorts of things.
Now, this is quite in contrast to the way I'm familiar with creating a web applications, at least so far. And I'd probably say, dare say that, the 80% of my audience here that's PHP programmers, where you're constructing these components as HTML to be assembled by the server and then sent out as a monolithic HTML. How long does it take to transition your thinking to something like what you just described?
It does tend to relate a lot to a person's background, because building a single page app, particularly with Aurelia, is a lot more like the way that you would approach building a desktop app. So there is a different way that you think about the problems. However, we find that people have been able to learn Aurelia very easily because it's convention based, a lot like modern PHP or Ruby frameworks. It follows, some standard UI patterns, and there's kind of just it's very consistent. So once you learn how to do the basic component scenario, that's how the same way that you handle navigation between pages, it's the same way you handle modal pop-up. It's the same way you handle any kind of dynamic data composition. So there's kind of this one pattern, if you will, that rules them all. And once you learn that and kind of understand it, you can reapply it in many, many different ways, and even create new ways to apply it. And so what we usually have to do is get people thinking in this component mindset first. And we start with just plain basic classes. Here's a class, it's got some properties, it's got some methods. Most people have some sort of programming background where they can understand that. And then we just say, well, to turn that into a component, all we do is create this HTML view that is capable of rendering that class. So the view can basically render out any property. It can, you can connect DOM events to fire methods on that class, and so on and so forth. So that is not so different in a way than a lot of even server-side frameworks are, because they usually have a templating engine and usually have some sort of data structure, especially if you come from like an MVC type pattern. You might have a controller that creates a model, and then it passes it off to the view, and then you kind of use the templating engine to template out the data. Well, Aurelia does that same thing. That's kind of how the component model works. The difference is that it's stateful, and as the data changes over time in memory, the templating engine automatically updates what the end user sees. So if you have a property called first name that just, say has the name Rob. You can, in the templating engine, say, all right, well, render the first name property. And if something in the app causes that property to change, then the view will automatically reflect that change. And the same thing happens with arrays and maps and sets and all these different data structures that in JavaScript. And so a lot of server-side developers understand the templating concept already. The difference is realizing that it's kind of alive, if you will. It's stateful. And as the state of that client changes over time, the view will just update to reflect that. And you break this into these small components so that it's simple to maintain and understand. And you just model out what you want the end user to experience. If the end user should see some piece of data, then there's a property on the class that represents that. And the templating engine just templates that out or renders it out. If there's something that the end user should do, such as clicking a button or dragging something, then there's a method on the class that is attached to that event that gets invoked. And once you understand this basic concept of how you build components, there's not much more to learn with Aurelia because everything is components out of components out of components. It's just a matter of whether you are showing it as a dialog pop-up or as a tooltip, or whether you're showing it as a screen that you navigate, in a sort of a navigation style app where you go from page to page to page, or whether you've got a multi-tabbed user interface. Each tab would have components in it, and the tab component itself would be a component. So once you kind of think in these terms, it becomes very, very powerful and very, very productive. And you can move very quickly, and you can reuse a lot of things within your app. And you can understand the system because it's consistent in terms of its architecture. And you can always kind of break things down into small pieces as you need to be manageable for you. And the framework just understands this pattern. It's built into the framework that understands this architectural idea. So it handles all the machinery that's needed to just kind of make it work.
We actually have a question from the chat room. I want to make sure I get this in here. It's Emily Strange is asking, is this heavily relying on scripting? I'm assuming someone running something like NoScript, it would just break this setup. What are your thoughts on things like NoScript? Or have we just moved beyond that now? Or if you're running with NoScript on the wild net, you're probably not going to get much of an experience at all?
Yeah, there's this question actually has two answers. So one is that today, script is required to really make this work. With that turned off, you're going to see pretty much an empty screen, a blank screen. However, one of the technologies we're working on for Aurelia that's coming later this year is a server-side render capability. So you still build the app exactly like it is going to render wholly in the browser, but you will be able to add this additional module, and we'll be able to actually render the client on the server and send that initial HTML down to the browser so that even if you have no script, it will fully render. And then at that time, the developer does, of course, need to do some work to say that, yes, I want to support this scenario. But at that point, when they interact with the page, even if you've got no script, if they've constructed their app correctly, then it can make server-side, it can make requests back to the server, and the server will just re-render the page again, just like a traditional app. Now, for the end user, the experience is degraded, right? Because they've got that whole post, that whole post-back effect and the flashing, and they don't really get the very native-like experience. So if you want that, of course, they have to have scripting turned on. But with this new capability we're working on, it would allow the app to at least function in a no script mode. But today, the way things stand is JavaScript has to be enabled. This is all running literally in the browser at the moment.
Yeah, your big demo on your homepage uses, it's not TypeScript, is it? It's ES6?
Yes.
Are all the features still accessible from plain old JavaScript as we remember it?
Yes, you can actually use ECMAScript 5 with Aurelia, and we've designed the API so that that is possible. It's not as elegant, as using modern JavaScript, but it's all possible. We had that as a main use case. And so we support ECMAScript 5, then ES6 or ES 2015, which was kind of the new version that added classes and modules and all that. And then, of course, ES 2016 was ratified this year. And we even support some future features of JavaScript as well through the use of transpilers and things for developers that want to use that. And most developers that do use our technology have a build system set up just the same way as you would with most other technologies, and so they choose to use modern JavaScript because they like classes and decorators and things like that, and it makes it a much more elegant developer experience. And part of what we do, part of what our organization does, is not just build the framework but also build tooling around this so that it's easy to get set up with a modern build setup. We have a command line tool. You can just say, create me a new project, and you can say, well, I want to use ECMAScript, or I want to use TypeScript. Do I want to use CSS or Sass or less? You get to make a bunch of choices about the technologies that you want to use to build your app, and then we basically generate a whole project setup for you with everything that just works out of the box. Most people choose to use transpilers, so they can use modern JavaScript or TypeScript. Most people choose to use some sort of CSS variant. Sass is very popular, but we support a bunch of them. We support anything, but out of the box, our tooling kind of supports pre-configuring you with what's the most popular options. Yeah, full support for ES5, ES 2016, 2015, and TypeScript.
Could we take a little step back and maybe mention what ECMAScript is?
ECMAScript is the official name for JavaScript. It's the name of the specification itself. JavaScript is kind of the common name that people use, and there's a standards body that manages that and adds new features to that and over time. One of the big deals that happened last year in 2015 was ES 2015. So it's the 2015 version of the specification of ECMAScript, because this was a huge update to the language. It added real modularity to the language. It added classes. It added lambdas. It added generators. Just tons and tons of features. In fact, it's the largest upgrade to the language in the history of the language. Huge update. And in my opinion, it almost makes it like having a brand new language in the browser, because the number of new features and the effects on your, what you can do with those is so extensive that it's if you haven't looked at JavaScript in a long time, or never looked at it, and you're looking at modern JavaScript, it very much looks and feels like a modern programming language. It's no longer like a scripty kind of language. I mean, it still has all the old traits that it had before. Nothing has been removed or broken. But by the addition of these new features, it begins to resemble modern PHP and Ruby and Python and C#. In fact, a lot of these other languages and platforms kind of fed into the design of the spec for ES 2015. So you'll see all these little influences in JavaScript from all these different sources. So it begins to take on a very modern language characteristic. And of course, the design is ongoing, and the standards body each year now is producing a standard so that the language continues to evolve on a regular basis. The language went for a very long period of time without any update. Well, it went 6 years. We had ES5 was in 2009, so it literally went 6 years with no update. But before that, it was about, I think it was 10 years from the previous update. So what we're trying to do, and what the standards body is trying to do, is to have smaller updates and improvements to the language, but on an annual basis. And the browsers are bought into this idea, and the spec writers are bought into this idea, and a lot of the framework authors are bought into this idea as well. So it's going to help the web evolve steadily, much more steadily, and that's a great benefit to us. So we're, as a framework, we're keeping tabs on all these things, and we're looking to how can we enable these new features to be used in our framework, and how can we future-proof what we're doing, and how can we stay close to the specs and kind of guide our developer community to be able to take advantage of whatever they want to take advantage of over time as these things evolve. A lot of people just know JavaScript, but the official spec name is ECMAScript, and it has multiple versions, and the browsers are constantly kind of updating their implementations to take advantage of the features that have been standardized from version to version.
So do you know if this could have been made, your framework, I mean, could it been made maybe 5 years ago?
Actually, it is possible because we support Internet Explorer 9. And the way we do that is that our framework is written with ECMAScript 2015 and a little bit of some future features. But ultimately, we use these transpilers that more or less, a transpiler is like a compiler, but it's not compiling down to a bytecode. It's actually compiling to another version of JavaScript. So what we do is we pick all the features and stuff that we want to use from modern and future JavaScript. Then we run our source code through a transpiler that compiles it to ECMAScript 5. So our source code will actually run on IE9, which is about 6 years ago, I think, something like that. Actually, it might be 7. I don't know, but it works. Our code all runs on IE9 today. You have to add a couple of polyfills, and polyfills is another kind of a term to our industry, which refers to a JavaScript library that detects a feature that's missing in the browser and patches it up, polyfills it up with a pure JavaScript implementation, so that as a developer, I can work as if I'm using a modern browser, even though it might be an old browser. Because the polyfills add the missing features. So by combining a transpiler with polyfills, we're able to actually have this extremely modern development experience and technology that works even back to Internet Explorer 9 and browsers of that time. So it could have been written 5 or 6 years ago. It would have been harder to write it because of the tooling wasn't present, but it actually could have been written and it would have worked. Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking if you are filling in all the missing bits, I guess it wouldn't really matter. But I guess it wouldn't really be usable too, right? Like how much overhead would that have on an application running on IE9?
Well, the big thing that you'll see a difference on is performance, because that was the big thing, especially with Internet Explorer around that time period. It was way behind the other browsers on performance. So because you are executing a lot more JavaScript code, it's more dependent on the browser's capability to compile that and to run it efficiently. And the older browsers are just slower. So that's the main thing that you would see. You would have seen and particularly the startup time of the application would have been a lot slower. Once things kind of get going in your average app, you probably wouldn't even see it even on an IE9. But that initial startup time where it has to consume all that JavaScript, parse it, compile it, basically, most browsers, you do kind of a just-in-time compilation process. That would be much slower on a much older browser.
What about mobile, though? What about mobile then? Would this be running well on a, let's say if I have an iPhone 3S, would this be running on there fine, or would I need to update to maybe the 5?
Yeah, the older phones will have issues. Again, it's mostly an issue of performance and the startup time. More modern iPhones, iPads, Androids, anything within the last couple of years, it's fine on that. So as a developer, you kind of have to choose, what are we targeting? How far do we want to go back in terms of our device and browser support? And then once you kind of determine that for your business or your product, then you can kind of see how Aurelia fits into that constraints and choose it or go a different route.
You mentioned tooling before, right? So I'm thinking this is not just going to be, if I download this and if I want to get it set up, I'm not just going to be, thrown into a bunch of code and I'm going to have to get, Apache set up and whatnot, right? So you have your own web browser there that I can use to run a mini test app that I write, maybe?
So what we have is a command line tool that is built on top of Node.js. So in the JavaScript world, all of the tooling that exists pretty much is built on Node.js because that allows, obviously we're working in JavaScript, that lets us write our tooling in JavaScript, and then Node.js is cross-platform. So it allows us to reach all the platforms with our tooling much easier. So you would first install Node.js, and then you would use NPM, which is Node's package manager, to install the Aurelia CLI. Now, at that point, you don't need anything else. Our CLI will let you create a new project. It will set up all the transpilers for you if you want those. It'll set up the build process, and it'll even run a a development web server for you to serve up the assets, which will watch your files for changes and auto refresh the browser as you actually edit code. And it also sets up the testing environment for you. So if you want to write unit tests, that's all pre-configured for you. So you can run the CLI in test mode, and it will continually watch your code and tests. So you can do a TDD style of continuous testing as well. And all of those scenarios are enabled by our command line tool out of the box. So you don't have to worry about setting anything else up. And then when you want to deploy the app, and Aurelia app is just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And in fact, our CLI bundles that app into everything into a single JavaScript file. So all your HTML, JavaScript, and CSS go to a single JavaScript file. It's basically like a package. You can think of it as a package. We call them bundles. To deploy your app, you just put that up on the server, with an HTML page that has a script tag that points at it. And that's it, because it's all static assets at that point. So you can use any web server technology. You can even serve these out of an Amazon S3 bucket, because in the end, it's just an HTML file and a JavaScript file, and that's all you need. That's all the app needs. But the CLI takes care of sort of getting all the build and testing and development pieces in place, so that you don't have to worry about any of that at all if you want to build an app.
So this would just be forward-facing, I guess, right? So if you wouldn't really have anything on the back end if you only want to make like a simple app, I suppose. Maybe that just uses somebody else's API.
Exactly. You don't need to have a backend at all. You can do whatever you want, really. You could some apps, like for example, on our website, if you go to the hub, there's a link to the hub. This is where we have a lot of our rich documentation. This is actually an Aurelia application, and its backend is GitHub. So we don't have, in fact, that entire application is served out of GitHub pages. There is no back end to it, and it simply calls into GitHub to get all of its data and its content. And we deploy our documentation with our library, so the docs are versioned with each release. And our hub application literally gets the appropriate released versions of the documentation directly, more or less, from GitHub. So that's an example of an app that is deployed through GitHub pages where there's no backend whatsoever, and it's calling to GitHub services. So you can call any web service you want. We're actually working on a new tutorial right now that is built on the Spotify API. So you'll build a little, we'll have this up in the next few weeks, where we'll teach you how to build a kind of a simple Spotify type app built on top of their public API. So you can use any public API that is reachable through HTTP, or you can build your own backend, and typically people build this as a set of web services, JSON services. And a lot of people, they do that because they're building apps that are particular to their business or their product. So they build their app in kind of these two pieces. One is the backend, that's just a simple set of HTTP services that they can call to retrieve JSON data or to make updates. And then the Aurelia app, which is the front end that calls those services. But we make no constraints about how you handle the back end. We're purely the front end technology. So it could be, static JSON files on a file server somewhere. It could be calling out to some third-party API like the GitHub API or the Spotify API, or it could be calling your own custom API, or any combination of all those things. So you can write completely back-endless apps, if you will, or you can write apps with very, very rich back-end technology. And you can use whatever technology you want on the back end.
Okay, so you mentioned if it's just going to be a front end, right? So I just have one little question, though. What if I want to use this for my business website? Would the search engine compatibility be there, or would I just be, not be able to use this for, like a standard data website?
Yeah, the use cases that we are focusing on right now are more around your rich application experiences. Like the Aurelia would not be the best fit for like your company's homepage, where you want to have marketing materials, any kind of marketing focused materials, because everything is happening in JavaScript, so that's not really great for SEO. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the technologies we're working on right now is our server-side render. And this actually addresses those issues because we combine it with what we call server-side render and client-side pickup. And the idea is that you turn this on, And a search engine or any other user agent would request the app, including a normal human being, and the initial render would be done on the server and then sent down to the client. And then at that point, the framework then picks up where the server left off and continues execution from that point on in the browser. So this kind of bridges the gap between the server render and the client render. And the developer doesn't really need to worry too much about how that scenario works. And this solves the SEO problem very, very simply, because it just, whenever a crawler is requesting that page, it will get HTML like any other page, and it won't even know that there is a single page app framework there. But when a user requests the page, it will get that same HTML, nice and fast from the server-side render, but then the client-side runtime of Aurelia will connect itself to that existing HTML and sort of transparently transform it into a single-page app, and it will continue to work in browser from that point on, so that only that initial render is done by the server. So this solves the SEO problem and improves usability and initial load times and a whole bunch of things, and that's actually in development now. So we'll have that a little bit later this year.
Cool. Hey, I've got an interesting follow-up to that. I have heard recent studies have shown that crawlers, or at least the Google crawler, which is the most important one, of course, do actually render things like ahrefs that are dynamically added in order to be able to navigate around to various pages if they're actually running a full JavaScript engine on most modern pages. So I think the SEO problem will definitely start disappearing over time, but it's good to see that you also have a static version of that in mind for that very same reason. Is that something you're familiar with, or am I telling you some new things?
No, we're familiar with that. The truth is that in reality, Google's technology really doesn't quite deliver on the promise. 100%.
Okay.
Though obviously I agree with you, I think that this is something that they're working on and other search engines are working on. It will most certainly improve over time. For the present day, though, the best way to handle that is with the server-side render. And then hopefully, like I said, over time, hopefully that just won't even be necessary anymore. There's a lot of things that are being done in web standards, and there's a lot of things that are being done by the search engines that I think as this stuff continues to progress, will kind of probably fade out that technology over time, and things will just work.
Cool.
But in the meantime, we kind of have to have these solutions while we're kind of waiting for everything to get there. And so that's one of the ways that we're addressing that.
So what happens to these components that get loaded? Can the browser GC them at some point, or is it just every page you go to is just going to keep getting it more and more bloated?
Well, the browser absolutely can GC them. I can't say that for sure of every framework, but for Aurelia it can. And the reason is that Aurelia is actually built on top of a dependency injection container. And it's hierarchical container, so that, for example, when you navigate from page to page, this container gets created for each navigation. And inside of that container is kind of where all the components live, so that as you navigate to a new page, the old child container can be disposed, and that allows the browser to garbage collect all the resources that were part of that page. And this kind of architectural concept is prevalent throughout Aurelia at multiple levels. So that it's really, the developer can kind of control the lifetime of various objects by saying, well, this is a singleton, therefore it's gonna stay in memory for the entire app, or this is transient, which means that when the screen goes away, it's going to completely go away. And by default, Aurelia kind of has default behaviors for components and things like that, so that it just does the right thing most of the time. But as a developer, if you need to change those things, you can plug in and control all of that sort of object lifetime characteristics. But it's designed that way specifically to address the kind of what you're talking about there, which is to enable the browser's GC to do its job rather than have this steadily ballooning memory issue. The longer you use the app, the more components and screens you navigate to, eventually your browser explodes. So we've designed the framework from the beginning to allow a GC collection of components.
Okay, one of the things when I was playing with early Dart, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, was that the particular framework they had at that point, maybe it was Angular 1, maybe it was something even before that, Polymer or something like that, was that you had to specifically label the objects that might change so that it could put the proper watchers on those. Is that still true with Aurelia, or is it all kind of transparent now?
No, that's very different with Aurelia. We can you don't have to specify anything like that. We can observe plain old JavaScript objects and arrays. In fact, one of the great benefits of Aurelia is that it works very nicely with just plain JavaScript classes and plain objects. So you don't have to annotate anything or decorate anything. You don't have to tell us anything other than here's my object, please display it. Now we do have ways to override our defaults, and then you can say, well, no, handle this another way, or no, handle that a different way. But the defaults or the conventions that we have are designed to address the 80% of all scenarios, so that for the most part, you just write a class and you're done, and it works. You don't have to go through that kind of extra step. That's definitely one thing that makes it really very different from pretty much everything else that's out there. Is that we're very much a convention over configuration system, and we focus on keeping your JavaScript clean. We want to stay out of your code so that when you look at a component, you basically don't really see Aurelia. You just see the code that you wrote yourself. We don't want to be in there in your way, and that's a very big, important differentiator with Aurelia. So you just create these simple classes and objects, and it just works.
Now, how about rendering speed? I mean, like one of the things I know about at least Angular 1, and I think also still true about Angular 2, is the more things you have on the page, even if they don't change, but like if you're rendering a list of 100 items, it has to keep watching all of them. Is this also something that Aurelia has to suffer from?
No, we take a fundamental different approach. In fact, this is something I disagreed heavily with the Angular team about when I was working with them. Their implementation uses something dirty checking, called dirty checking, which means that when you bind something, a piece of data to an element on the screen, it gets more or less added to a list of things that need to be checked. And certain events and things that happen in the system cause this list to be iterated. And each item in the list needs to be checked to see whether it's changed. So if you've data bound, some span in HTML to, first name property, then every so often, Angular has to basically look at that binding and say, okay, the old value of first name was foo, the new value is bar, therefore it has changed. I need to then kind of fabricate this fake event that looks like an observer event that fires, and then when that fires, the binding system can receive that event and update the DOM or whoever else is observing that. What Aurelia does is it actually has a true observer system from the beginning, which is meaning we don't do this kind of dirty checking. When you change a property, we know exactly that one property changed, and we only need to do the work to address the change in that one property, as opposed to Angular, which when anything changes, it has to check the whole list, right? It doesn't actually know what changed until it traverses this list to find what actually changed, and then it kind of surfaces as an event so that it looks as if that was an observed property, but it doesn't really use observation by default. But it really uses this observation mechanism so we know exactly what changed and when it changed. But we go a little bit farther than that because we don't kind of fire those change events immediately at that point in time. What we actually do is batch them. And we use a modern capability of the browser called the micro task queue. And this is a work queue that fires after the end of a user function, basically. So if you have a click handler, say on a button, and you execute some code, and your code changes a bunch of properties on your model, we don't go update the DOM right then. What we do is we queue up all those changes onto this micro task queue, and then as soon as your function exits, as soon as all your code is done executing, we then take this batch and we send the entire batch to the DOM to update it. And this results in massive performance improvements. So if you actually benchmark Aurelia on render speed and compare it to the other frameworks, it's as fast or faster than everything else out there. Technically, in my runs, it's a little bit faster than everything else out there, but there's smaller differences, and obviously it's on my machine, and I've run the same benchmark, external benchmark, as close as I can to the same setup. But it's the point is, though, it's very, very fast. And it's very, very efficient. It's more efficient in terms of memory. It's more efficient in terms of just what the work energy consumption, right? If you want a greener framework, you want one that doesn't have to do a whole bunch of work every time something changes. And really, it does the minimal work possible because it knows exactly what changes, and then it batches those changes. It doesn't have to go check a bunch of other things that haven't changed. So there's a fundamental different approach in the way that that binding system is implemented, and that has various different effects in terms of how you write your code, much simpler on the Aurelia side, in terms of performance, in terms of memory, in terms of energy consumption, and all those sort of things.
So is this one of the things that motivated you to create Aurelia in the first place? And if so, are there other things too that you're sort of solving the problems of?
Yes, I mean that was one thing. That's an interesting technical aspect of Aurelia because I'm actually not aware of any other framework that has a data binding system that it works that way. And so we were kind of the first to do this, and obviously it's a bit of a risk to try a new technique like that. But as it turns out, it's fantastic. Other things that we wanted to solve is just make development simpler. When I looked at all the frameworks that were out there, there was a lot of what I would call cruft that you had to write to use that framework. You had to configure this, configure that. You had to decorate this with that. You had to do all this kind of stuff. And that creates more work for the developer. It creates more code that the browser has to download. It creates a stronger amount of vendor lock-in because that framework-specific code is more encroaching into your code base. It makes it harder to migrate across versions of that framework or to other frameworks because of the presence of that code. There's a lot of negative characteristics from that style. And I'm heavily influenced by a number of platforms that have gone with what I would call a POJO or a POCO model, where the idea is you just write a plain class. In fact, there's nothing remarkable about it. Or in fact, the remarkable thing is that there is nothing remarkable about it. It's just a plain object, and it's all your code. It's not ours. It's not using our APIs or anything. And then Aurelia has a set of basic conventions that it says, okay, you've handed me this plain class. Okay, and you want to render it, I know how to do that, right? And so it will then render that out as a component or whatnot. And so that's another big differentiator. Again, I looked out across the whole spectrum, and it was being done outside of the JavaScript world. It was being done in server-side frameworks. You see this a lot, especially like in sort of data access layers that different server-side frameworks have, where they have this, especially look into the .NET and Java space, they'll have these POJO or POCO models where the idea is you create a class, and then you just tell the database to save it. And it knows how to translate it into tables. It knows how to do the efficient queries and joins, and it just makes it all work. And you work in terms of plain classes, and so you don't see all that goop that's there. And so you see this across a lot of other platforms in different areas, but you don't see it on the front end, and you didn't see it at all in the JavaScript world. But I found this to be incredibly advantageous in these other scenarios, and so we wanted to bring this to JavaScript. And that's something that Aurelia does. It's completely unique. You won't see anything like this anywhere else. So, and there's a number of other things. We wanted to address the business concerns because I looked out across what was happening, and I saw that there's all these frameworks, and companies are spending hundreds of millions of dollars investing and building rich JavaScript apps on top of these frameworks. And the frameworks themselves are not, often not officially supported. They're not official products of the companies. Even the ones built by Google are not official Google products. And so it's kind of like, wow, that's from a business perspective, that's super risky. And we're not talking about a small library that is just like I need some serialization library. We're talking about we're picking a platform to build on, and there aren't any platforms where there's a company that's actually officially standing behind that platform. So we wanted to build up a business, and we wanted to do this in the open source realm. We wanted to say, look, this is MIT licensed, this is free, this is open source, and we have a company, and this is our official product. And if you use it, we're going to have a customer relationship with you. If you want support, we're going to be able to provide that. If you want long-term support, we're going to be able to provide that for you. We wanted to address all these business issues that were completely absent from the JavaScript world almost entirely, especially in the front-end framework space. And we wanted to be able to go to companies and say, not only do we have an awesome technology, but we can support your business, and here are the ways that we can do that. And all those, those various things, paid support and all these kind of things that we offer they're all completely optional. But we wanted to put them there and put a real business strategy behind this, so that businesses could feel secure in adopting a platform like this and know that we weren't just going to change things, or we weren't going to leave them hanging. Sort of this Angular 1 to Angular 2 thing is an example of what should not ever really happen. But that happens. The reason that happened is because this aspect is completely missing from the Angular ecosystem. It's not a product. There's no real platform initiative at the company that says we're going to support customers and whatnot in this fashion. All these things are completely missing from that. And so the motivators for making those changes are not driven in any way by the community or the open source community or any customer relationships or anything like that. It's driven by, things that most people aren't aware of internally that are driving that. And this creates a completely different type of an ecosystem, and a different technology, and it puts businesses that use these different technologies and these different choices in a different sort of position as well. And we really wanted to address those problems. And there's lots of things, but those are a few things. Web standards. Again, we saw technologies that were really more interested in kind of locking people into their framework and less about kind of staying close to the web standards, which is better for everybody. So we really wanted to stay close to the web standards and help developers to learn the web standards, so that when you learn Aurelia, for example, only a small amount of what you learn is actually Aurelia. You spend more time learning modern JavaScript, modern DOM, web components, all these things that transcend Aurelia itself and are part of the web, that are great for you, your career, your company, and your product long term. And then you just add a little bit on top of that to learn Aurelia. And so we make it, in a sense, easy for you to migrate away from our technology, because we think it's the right thing to do to help developers to be focused on web standards and doing these kinds of things. So these are all kind of characteristics that set us apart from a lot of what's out there today.
Well, if Simon Phipps was here, I would actually he would actually have maybe a slight challenge to that. That means that essentially Durandal is guiding the roadmap and actually sort of in charge of what new features might eventually end up in the software. Do you foresee a time when Aurelia will be enough of a standalone project that it would be moved under something like an Apache Foundation project or something like that, so that there's actually some independence in the governance?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely see that as a real future for us. Right now, we're in the process of kicking things off. We do the best job that we can, of course, to communicate with our community and to consider their use cases. And everyone that's on our team is actually a real developer working on real products and consulting and engaging with customers. And we bring all that feedback in, and we do everything publicly. We don't do anything in secret. So we're doing the best job that we can as a company to be good stewards of the technology that we've built for the community. And we absolutely see a possible transfer to an independent foundation at some point in the future. I think that's absolutely something we would love to see happen.
How production ready is this? Where are we along the development and release cycle?
Yeah, we're actually in a release candidate right now, and in this month we'll RTM. So in the next few months we'll hit 1.0 official RTM. And it's quite production ready. In fact, we have announced the production readiness of it when we announced our beta, which was in November of last year. Prior to that, people went to production with it and didn't have any problems, but we didn't officially say, like, it's a good idea to do this. So when we went to beta of November of last year, we announced that we had locked down the API, so there weren't going to be breaking changes. There were two exceptions to that, but we pre-warned the community, and we said, between the beta and the release candidate, these are the things that are going to change, this is how they're going to change, and this is how you can prepare for that. So if you're okay going to production knowing that, then we approve of that. And we've had a lot of people go to production with apps in that time frame. And now that we're in release candidate, we've made those final couple little breaking changes. Those were related to web standards changes that were kind of out of our control. But that's all settled down. We've addressed a lot of bugs, a lot of edge cases, a lot of people go into production. and it's production ready at this point. We're just kind of, if you will, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Just that final bit of polish and work on tooling and documentation and things before we officially say, okay, this is 1.0, and then we move on to point 1, point 2, other things that we want to do down the road.
Cool. And you said you could serve this from like, S3, but obviously there's no data storage there. Do you have a preferred back-end persistent store that you recommend to use with Aurelia? Or does it matter?
It doesn't even matter. I mean, honestly, the community, we have people doing PHP, we have people doing Ruby, we have people Python, .NET, Java, we have Scala backends, we have people using like Play Framework, we have like I said, there's apps that are kind of back-endless apps that just use other third-party services. So the framework itself doesn't really care what you do, and we have people in the community doing all sorts of things with that.
Cool. Is there a Firebase plugin for it yet?
I'm not sure if there's a Firebase plugin, but it may not even be necessary, to be honest, because of the architecture of Aurelia. We integrate very easily with a lot of existing technology because it's kind of all about plain objects and things like that.
Yeah.
I'll need to check that though.
I always like the notion with Firebase of having like three-way data binding, that you have two browsers that show exactly the same chat because they connect through the back end, and it's all done in JSON. So very cool stuff. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to get one or two other things. I got to make sure I'm going on my list and all that. Are there any publicly facing success stories that people can go look at? Is it linked to from your site?
That's what we're working on, to be honest. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's been built by companies you would know, and then some new companies and all kinds of stuff. The big problem for us right now is there's always politics around the official announcement of those kind of things. So we're actually in a lot of discussions right now, and there's a GitHub issue where people have just kind of chimed in to say, here's what I built, go take a look at this, here's what I built, go take a look at that. But we're working currently on some official case studies with various organizations so that people can see some cool stuff that's been built.
Awesome. And somebody asked earlier, I forgot who it was, might have been eSol or somebody, asked, is this mobile friendly in the sense of handling touch events?
Yes. I mean, we don't have like a touch library right now, but we have a rich community ecosystem, and a lot of people write plugins for Aurelia. And so there's like touch and gesture plugins for Aurelia that you can drop in. You can use any of the standard APIs to do that. And we have people building tablet and mobile, phone apps with it just fine. So absolutely. Cool. And we're working on some other products kind of that are more mobile oriented as well that aren't released yet. So that'll address some of that too.
And how about having not a marketplace necessarily, but a place to register my particular custom-built components so that other people can share those?
Yes, right now we literally have a repository on GitHub called Registry, where anyone can submit a pull request to that to list their plugins or components in that registry. And in the next month or two, you'll see our developer hub get new functionality that allows people to be able to search plugins directly, and it will and get instructions on how to install them and connect to the developer's website and all kinds of things like that. So we actually have the data there in the registry, and anyone can kind of go there and see that. And we're in the process of surfacing that visually through our developer hub so you can find those and install them really easily.
Cool. And by the way, that was the Andromedan who came up with that other question about mobile. So yay. We're almost out of time. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before we have to let you go?
Wow. I mean, we kind of went all over the place, which is cool. I would just love for people to come check it out, build an app, or just have some fun with it. People build games with it. People build business apps. People build all kinds of stuff with it. So we'd love for you to just come, be part of our community, build something awesome, share it with us, help us make the product better. So much of open source is really about community and collaboration and being part of something and working together to build something amazing. And we've got a phenomenal community with close to 400 contributors to our project and many thousands of developers. So we would love you to join us, help us make it better, and I'd love to see what you're building and just get a chance to know you and just be part of that. So thank you for this opportunity too. It's been real fantastic to chat with you guys.
Cool. I got 2 more questions I have to ask, or else my audience gets mad. What's your favorite scripting language? I bet I know.
I guess it has to be JavaScript.
Yeah, that's fine. And what's your favorite text editor?
Oh, I've been using Visual Studio Code and Atom a lot. I'm back and forth between those two. They're both written with JavaScript, so.
Yeah, I know. Yes, it's we got to get the Atom guys on. I keep seeing them at OSCON and stuff, but I keep forgetting to. I don't forget. I just get too busy, don't add them to the list. But Adam looks amazing. Okay, hey, it's been great having you on. Again, this is one of those shows where I'm going to want to go play with this right after this. I never get enough time. Then there's next week's show, and I say the same thing. There's next week's show. They say the same thing. But you've definitely inspired me. In fact, before I finish learning Dart, I think maybe I'll give one of my clients has to do a nice SBA, and I think I'll try it with Aurelius just to see how close I can get, because I can always port the concept of that Dart when I get finished. So, but it sounds like it's a good thing to learn, and it sounds efficient, and that's amazing. So thanks for coming on the show and talking to us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Very good. That was Rob Eisenberg talking to us about Aurelius. Aurelia. There we go. What do you think, Guillermo?
Well, yeah, it does look really interesting. I would not mind giving it a shot myself. I've been stuck in the 2006 era of JavaScript for a while myself, so I need to update it somehow.
Yeah, every time I want to hate JavaScript more, they keep fixing it. It's like, now I can't say I hate it that much anymore. It's like it used to be really tacky. I remember I was on a paddle with Brandon Eicher, the guy that created JavaScript.
Yeah,
and I remember it right at the beginning. This is like in 1999, and the JavaScript was just becoming popular for making little simple stuff. He says he apologized within the first sentence he said for optional semicolons. That's such a wrong thing to have ever done. I don't even know why I did that. Of course, nobody takes advantage of the optional semicolons anymore, thank God, or it'd be a lot harder to edit code. But anyway, enough of that. Let's look at the upcoming guests. So we've got next week is Koha ILS, a library information system. LucidWorks, which is about searching your data. Karina, which is an easy-to-use, instant-on native container environment from Rackspace. Someone from Capital One talking about Hygeia, which is their first open-source project. They plan on releasing many open-source projects, but this is a monitoring dashboard. We've had a number of those kinds of things on the show before, but this will be from Capital One. And then we have from lowercase one, no, just kidding, okay? Capital One, and clustering projects. That's if you've heard of Flocker or Deval or Elliot or Machinist or PowerStrip, that group of projects, we're going to have some representative talking about those. And then also on the schedule coming up is Linux Presentation Day. As far as I understand it, all over Europe, they'll be having simultaneous events on one Saturday to kind of get people introduced to Linux, maybe get them away from Microsoft products, that sort of thing. If you want to find out about all these projects and the future ones we're also looking at, you can go to twit.tv/floss. We could always use some more guests. However, I just came back from, I didn't really come back yet, I haven't been home yet, from the Red Hat Summit. I took names and took emails. So I got about 6 or 7 more projects I'm going to slot in pretty quickly. That was really fun. A couple of them have actually been on the show before, but like 3 or 4 years ago, so it was like, we're going to be giving updates to a few of the things. And we taped this show live. We took a couple questions from the live chat room. We taped this show at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Tuesdays. You can watch us and chat with us at live.twit.tv. You can follow us on Floss Weekly on Google+, and that tweets over to Floss Weekly on Twitter. You can also follow me at Randall L. Schwartz on Google+. That's the origin for most of my longer stories. And that also tweets over a pointer to Merlin, Merlyn. So yeah, I was just at Red Hat Summit, took a lot of names, got a lot of people for that, which made it totally productive for me. I will be next week, actually not even next week, it's this weekend actually, yeah, I'm blurring everything together again. I'm going to be at the Texas Linux Fest, and it's going to be a low of 75 and a high of 100 every one of the days that I am there. So I am not necessarily looking forward to that. I am looking forward to not punching myself in the face and giving myself a black eye like I had a few weeks ago when I went there for OSCON. I'm not going to Fisley in Brazil because I'm afraid of being a Zika vector, so I'm not going to do that. I will be at Hotlanta, that'd be Atlanta for the rest of you, on Labor Day weekend at DragonCon, and I have 4 or 5 panels I'm going to be on there. Still trying to get on the podcast panel. I don't know why he hasn't gotten back to me yet, but I'm supposed to be on the podcasting track as well. I think that's all the plugs I've got for today. Guillermo, anything you want to plug?
I guess people can just look for me on Twitter. I am under GAMARAL. You can also look for me on YouTube. I do post a few, crazy, wacky videos of me repairing stuff for my car or whatever. And that is just look for Guillermo Amaral, or just search for Gamaral and you'll see a DJ. That's not me, the other guy.
Okay, the other guy, the other Gamma. All right, that's very cool. Well, it's nice having dinner with you last night. We finally got to get together, like I keep saying over and over again. I mean, I'm down here enough times. I should have been able to get to you more often. And thank you for stepping in as the co-host for today's South of the Border show.
Not a problem, man. Anytime.
Thank you. And we'll see you again next week on FLOSS Weekly.